They clinked $200 glasses of vintage champagne to celebrate their flawless elite lifestyle while I stood in the shadows of the ballroom nursing a plastic cup of lukewarm tap water. My younger sister Chloe was draped in designer silk and diamonds that could have paid off a mortgage. I was wearing a 5-year-old off-the-rack suit with fraying cuffs. In their eyes, I was the pathetic broke brother who never measured up. But what they didn't know, what no one in that glittering self-congratulatory room knew, was that the very foundation of their perfect lives was built on a $187,000 secret sitting in a fireproof lockbox in my closet. My name is Samuel Higgins, and I am a 36-year-old IT network administrator for the local public school district. I fix crashed servers, I untangle cables in dusty basements, and I drive a 2012 Honda Civic that rattles when it hits 60. I don't live a life of glamour. I live in a modest, cramped duplex on the wrong side of town. But tonight wasn't about me. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, an event hosted at the Oakwood Valley Country Club, a place where the membership fee alone cost more than my annual salary. From my spot near the service doors, I watched my parents, Richard and Susan. They were glowing, holding court among the local elite, soaking in the admiration of doctors, lawyers, and politicians. But their eyes and their highest praises were exclusively reserved for Chloe and her slick, fast-talking real estate broker husband, Trent. Trent was wearing a custom-tailored Italian tuxedo. He had a smile that looked expensive and eyes that constantly scanned the room for someone more important to talk to. Chloe hung on his arm, the absolute picture of the country club socialite. She was the star of the Higgins family, the church choir soloist, the valedictorian, the one destined for greatness. I was just the invisible workhorse. "Look at them," my fiancée Claire muttered, shifting uncomfortably beside me. She adjusted the strap of her dress, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She had been on edge all night, painfully aware of the massive wealth gap between us and the rest of my family. "Your dad just introduced Trent to the mayor as his greatest investment. He didn't even look your way when we walked in." "Let them have their night, Claire," I said quietly, taking a sip of water. "It's just how they are." But my chest felt tight. I stared at my hands. They were rough calloused from years of hauling hardware and racking servers. Trent's hands looked like they had never lifted anything heavier than a Mont Blanc pen. Every time I looked at my parents fawning over Trent's supposed massive success, a bitter, heavy truth threatened to claw its way up my throat. I swallowed it down. I had swallowed it down for 6 years. Suddenly, the soft jazz playing over the grand piano faded out. The clinking of silverware against fine china ceased. Chloe was tapping a silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. She stood at the center of the ballroom, a microphone in her other hand. A spotlight swung over, illuminating her like an angel descending from heaven. Trent stood slightly behind her, wearing a smug, practiced grin. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." Chloe's voice echoed through the massive room, sweet and melodic. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Chloe made a subtle flicking gesture with her fingers toward a table near the front. 3 of her closest friends immediately pulled out their iPhones, holding them up. The red recording lights blinked like warning beacons. 40 years. Chloe began, her voice dripping with emotion. "Mom, Dad, 40 years of absolute excellence. You taught us that the Higgins name means something. It means ambition. It means never settling for second best. You built a legacy, and I am so incredibly blessed to say that Trent and I are carrying that torch forward." The room erupted into polite, appreciative applause. My father beamed, raising his glass to Trent. "Trent has just closed another multi-million-dollar commercial expansion," Chloe continued, her voice rising in pitch, demanding applause. The crowd gave it to her. "We are living the dream you envisioned for us. We are the standard." Then the smile on her face shifted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by something cold, theatrical, and deeply venomous. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the VIP tables, piercing through the crowd until the spotlight operator followed her gaze. The blinding white beam hit me directly in the face. 200 pairs of eyes turned to the back of the room. The silence that fell over the ballroom was suffocating. "But," Chloe said, her tone dropping into a faux sympathetic purr that echoed off the mahogany walls. "A legacy is a difficult thing to uphold. Not everyone has what it takes to thrive in this family. Sometimes, no matter how much you try to pull someone up, they insist on staying at the bottom." My breath hitched. Beside me, Claire stiffened. "To my older brother Samuel," Chloe said, pointing directly at me. "The cautionary tale." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the front tables. "Look at him, everyone. He's pushing 40, playing with school computers and driving a car that looks like it belongs in a scrapyard. He's the pathetic failure of the Higgins family who settles for mediocrity while the rest of us actually build something. So let's raise a glass to Samuel, folks. Because without a baseline of utter disappointment, how would the rest of us know how high we've actually climbed?" The room didn't just laugh, it erupted. It was a cruel, echoing wave of amusement. 200 wealthy, successful people wrapped in silk and velvet throwing their heads back and laughing at the man in the cheap suit. I looked at Trent. He wasn't just smiling. He was snickering, whispering something to the mayor who chuckled and shook his head. I looked at my parents. Richard and Susan didn't look angry at Chloe for ruining the toast. They didn't look defensive of their son. They looked down at their plates, their faces flushed, embarrassed by me, not by her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The humiliation was so heavy, so absolute, that it froze the blood in my veins. The spotlight felt like the heat of a magnifying glass burning into an ant. I turned to Claire, desperate for an anchor, for just one person to squeeze my hand and tell me we were leaving. Instead, Claire took a physical step away from me. Her face was scarlet red. She wasn't looking at me with empathy. She was looking at the floor, shrinking into herself, desperate to distance herself from the target of the joke. The betrayal in her body language was a physical blow to my ribs. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice completely hollow. I turned my back on the blinding spotlight and pushed through the heavy oak service doors. The air in the hallway was cool, but I couldn't breathe. My chest heaved as I walked down the long carpeted corridor toward the parking lot. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. The laughter from the ballroom was muffled now, but it still rang in my ears like a siren. Before I even reached the heavy glass exit doors, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Then it buzzed again, and again. A rapid, endless staccato of vibrations. I pulled my phone out, the cracked screen illuminating the dim hallway. Notifications were flooding my lock screen. Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Chloe hadn't just orchestrated a live humiliation. She had coordinated a digital execution. One of her friends had already uploaded the video. I clicked the notification, my hands shaking uncontrollably. There I was, bathed in the spotlight, looking like a deer in headlights, wearing my frayed suit, while the audio of Chloe's mocking voice played crystal clear. The caption read, "When you're the millionaire sister carrying the broke, pathetic brother. Hashtag family disappointment. Hashtag success story." I watched the view count tick up in real time. 500 views, 2,000 views, 10,000 views. Comments were already pouring in. "OMG, he looked so miserable, LeMayo. Why did he even show up dressed like that? Imagine being the absolute loser of the family." I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the cold night air, the gravel of the parking lot crunching beneath my shoes. I walked toward my battered Honda Civic parked in the overflow lot, the only car that didn't have a luxury emblem on the hood. The conflict wasn't over just because I left the party. It was following me. It was multiplying. As I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the view count crossed 50,000. My sister had taken the one thing I had left, my quiet dignity, and weaponized it for internet clout. They thought I was a failure. They thought I was a parasite living in the shadow of their golden empire. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I looked back at the glowing windows of the Oakwood Valley Country Club. "Keep laughing, Chloe." I thought the numbness in my chest slowly calcifying into something cold, dark, and incredibly dangerous. "Keep drinking your champagne. Because tomorrow, I'm opening the lockbox. The blinding white light from the overhead spot hit my face with the force of a physical blow. The sudden illumination stripped away the comforting shadows at the back of the ballroom, leaving me completely exposed. 200 faces turned simultaneously in my direction. The soft murmurs of the Oakwood Valley Country Club elite died down instantly, replaced by a suffocating heavy silence. I could feel the heat of the spotlight baking into the cheap fabric of my 5-year-old suit. I blinked against the glare, my vision swimming with the sudden brightness, but I could still see my sister Chloe standing at the center of the room. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly merciless. Chloe held the silver microphone close to her mouth. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she tilted her head in a gesture of exaggerated pity. The room waited, hanging on her every word. She had just spent the last 5 minutes praising my parents for their 40 years of flawless marriage, their impeccable taste, and their undeniable success. She had praised her husband Trent for his visionary real estate deals, painting him as the ultimate modern patriarch. She had built a towering pedestal of family glory, and now she was about to throw me off it. "A legacy is a fragile thing," Chloe said, her voice echoing perfectly off the mahogany-paneled walls. Her tone had dropped from celebratory joy to a sickeningly sweet, theatrical sorrow. It takes decades of sacrifice, ambition, and relentless drive to build the kind of reputation our parents have established. It takes a certain kind of caliber to thrive in this environment. Trent and I wake up every single day striving to honor that standard. But as much as it pains me to say this, not everyone is cut out for greatness. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze locked directly on me. Trent stood right behind her. He crossed his arms over his custom Italian tuxedo, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across his perfectly tanned face. He looked like a man watching a highly entertaining execution. Sometimes Chloe continued the microphone, amplifying her fake sigh. No matter how much support you offer, no matter how many times you try to lift someone up, they simply refuse to climb. They insist on staying firmly at the bottom. We all know that a family is only as strong as its weakest link. And unfortunately for the Higgins family, our weakest link is on full display tonight. A ripple of uncomfortable energy moved through the front tables. The mayor shifted in his seat. A prominent local judge leaned forward, squinting into the spotlight to get a better look at me. I stood absolutely still. My hands were gripped tightly together in front of me, my knuckles turning bone white. To my older brother, Samuel, Chloe announced, her voice rising in pitch, demanding the room's full attention. The cautionary tale. The words hit the silent room like a whip. A few nervous chuckles broke out, hesitant at first, unsure if this was an inside joke or a public slaughter. Chloe made sure it was the latter. "Look at him," everyone she commanded, sweeping her free hand toward me. "He is pushing 40 years old. While Trent is closing multi-million-dollar commercial expansions, Samuel is playing with dusty computers at the local middle school. He lives in a rented duplex that fits in my garage. He drove here tonight in a car that looks like it barely survived a collision with a freight train. He is the pathetic failure of the Higgins family, who settles for absolute mediocrity while the rest of us are out here actually building something." The hesitant chuckles mutated. As Chloe's tone shifted from pity to blatant mockery, the crowd followed her lead. The nervous energy dissolved into genuine cruel amusement. Someone near the front burst into loud laughter, and that was the spark that ignited the room. "So let us raise a glass to Samuel tonight," Chloe shouted over the rising noise, lifting her crystal champagne flute high into the air. Because without a baseline of utter disappointment, how would the rest of us ever know how incredibly high we have climbed? Cheers to the brother who makes us all look brilliant by comparison. The room erupted. It was a wave of sound, a crushing, echoing roar of laughter from 200 of the wealthiest people in the city. They threw their heads back in their tailored suits and silk gowns, laughing at the man trapped in the blinding light. The sound bounced off the crystal chandeliers and the polished floor surrounding me, pressing in on me from every possible angle. I looked at Trent. He was no longer just smiling. He was laughing, openly leaning over to whisper something into the ear of the country club president, who barked out a laugh and shook his head, pointing his expensive cigar in my direction. I looked at my parents. Richard and Susan sat at the head table, the place of highest honor. They were the architects of this family. They were the ones supposed to protect their children. But as the entire room mocked their oldest son, they did not stand up. They did not take the microphone away from Chloe. They did not even look at me. My father stared down at his half-eaten plate of filet mignon, his face flushed red. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes fixed firmly on the floral centerpiece. They were not angry at Chloe for her unspeakable cruelty. They were deeply, profoundly embarrassed by me. They were ashamed that my cheap suit and my mediocre job were ruining the aesthetic of their perfect anniversary gala. I did not scream. I did not yell. I did not step forward to defend myself. The humiliation was so absolute, so overwhelmingly heavy, that it bypassed my anger and went straight to my bones, freezing me in place. The air in my lungs felt like thick, frozen mud. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that barely masked the sound of the mocking laughter. I felt like I was standing at the bottom of the ocean, crushed by an invisible pressure that was flattening my ribs. I turned my head slightly, looking for my anchor. My fiancée Claire was standing right beside me. We had been together for 3 years. She knew how hard I worked. She knew the long hours I pulled fixing network crashes. I needed her to look at me, to slide her hand into mine, to whisper that it was time to go. I needed just one person in this massive, glittering room to stand in my corner. But when I looked at Claire, the final piece of my world collapsed. Claire was not looking at me with empathy. Her face was a dark, burning scarlet. Her eyes were wide with panic, darting around the room as she absorbed the laughter directed at us. She looked terrified, not for me, but for her own social standing. As the spotlight continued to burn down on us, Claire took a deliberate physical step away from me. She created a visible gap between our bodies. She shifted her weight, turning her shoulders toward the exit, desperately trying to signal to the room that she was not part of this joke. She dropped her gaze to the floor, refusing to meet my eyes, shrinking into herself to escape the collateral damage of my humiliation. The betrayal in her body language was a physical strike to my heart. It was worse than Chloe's words. It was worse than Trent's laughter. The woman I was going to marry had just abandoned me the moment the light became too harsh. "Excuse me," I whispered. My voice was completely hollow, a raspy breath that barely made a sound. Claire did not look up. She just kept staring at the carpet, her face burning with secondhand shame. I turned my back on the blinding spotlight. I pushed my hands against the heavy oak service doors and shoved them open, stumbling out of the ballroom and letting the doors swing shut behind me, instantly muffling the terrible sound of the crowd. The hallway outside the ballroom was dimly lit and cool, smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive catering. My chest heaved as I walked down the long carpeted corridor. Every step felt like dragging lead weights tied to my ankles. My vision blurred slightly, my mind racing to process the sheer scale of what had just happened. I had expected passive-aggressive comments. I had expected to be ignored. I had never expected a public execution. Before I even reached the heavy glass exit doors leading to the parking lot, my phone vibrated in the breast pocket of my suit. It vibrated again. Then a third time. Then a continuous rapid staccato of buzzing that felt like a swarm of angry bees trapped against my chest. I stopped walking. I reached into my pocket with shaking hands and pulled out my phone. The cracked screen illuminated the dim hallway, casting a pale glow across my face. Notifications were flooding my lock screen faster than I could read them. Facebook alerts, TikTok notifications, Instagram tags, text messages from distant acquaintances. Chloe had not just orchestrated a live humiliation in front of 200 people. She had coordinated a digital broadcast. During the speech, I had seen her friends holding up their phones. They had not just been recording for private memories. They had been live broadcasting my destruction. I tapped the top notification, my thumb trembling so badly I almost dropped the device. The app opened, loading a video clip instantly. There I was, trapped on the small screen, bathed in the spotlight. I looked like a cornered animal wearing my frayed collar, while the audio of Chloe's mocking voice played crystal clear through my phone speaker. The camera zoomed in on my face just as the crowd erupted into laughter, capturing my exact expression of shock and defeat. Below the video, the caption stared back at me in bold, unforgiving letters. "When you are the millionaire sister carrying the broke, pathetic brother." I stared at the screen, my breathing stopping entirely. The conflict was not over just because I walked out of the ballroom. It was not confined to the walls of the country club. It was following me. It was multiplying, spreading like a virus across the internet. I watched the view count tick up in real time, the numbers flipping rapidly like a slot machine. 1,000 views, 5,000 views, 20,000 views. Comments were already pouring into the comment section, a waterfall of text from strangers who were joining my family and tearing me apart. "Oh my God, he looks so absolutely miserable. Why did he even show up dressed like a substitute teacher? Imagine being the absolute ultimate loser of the family. He literally looks like he is going to cry. Pathetic." I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the freezing night air. The cold hit my face, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom, but it did nothing to clear my head. The gravel of the parking lot crunched loudly beneath my worn leather shoes. I bypassed the rows of gleaming Mercedes, BMWs, and Range Rovers walking all the way to the unlit overflow lot in the back. There sat my battered 2012 Honda Civic, the only car in the entire lot that did not have a luxury emblem bolted to the hood. I unlocked the door and practically collapsed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut to block out the world. I gripped the steering wheel, the cold plastic biting into my palms. My phone continued to vibrate violently on the passenger seat, lighting up the dark interior of the car with endless notifications. 50,000 views, 70,000 views. My sister had taken the one thing I had carefully protected for my entire life, my quiet dignity. She had ripped it away and weaponized it for internet clout, serving me up as a sacrificial lamb to prove her own superiority. They all thought I was a failure. They all thought I was a parasite living in the shadow of their golden, perfect empire. They thought they were untouchable. I turned the key in the ignition. The old engine sputtered, hesitated, and then roared to life, the dashboard lights flickering dimly. I looked in the rearview mirror, staring at the glowing, massive windows of the Oakwood Valley Country Club. I could see the silhouettes of people dancing, drinking, celebrating my absolute destruction. The numbness in my chest, the overwhelming crush of the humiliation, slowly began to change. The panic faded. The shock evaporated. In its place, something cold, dark, and incredibly dangerous began to calcify around my heart. "Keep laughing. Chloe," I said out loud, my voice steadying, dropping into a low, terrifying calm in the empty car. "Keep drinking your $200 champagne. Keep soaking in the applause. Because tomorrow the lockbox opens." I did not sleep a single second that night. I sat in the dark of my duplex, staring at the ceiling while my phone vibrated against the nightstand until the battery finally died. When the sun came up, I plugged the charger into the wall and waited for the screen to glow. I hoped against all logic that the previous night had been a bad dream. I hoped the video had been taken down or forgotten. But the internet never forgets, and it certainly never forgives. The moment my phone powered on a flood of notifications froze the screen. The video my sister uploaded had not just gone viral, it had exploded. 3 million views. 3 million people had watched me stand in the center of a ballroom like a complete fool while my own flesh and blood tore my dignity to shreds. But the view count was not the worst part. The worst part was the comment section. The internet loves a target, and my sister had painted a massive bullseye squarely on my back. Somehow overnight, the digital mob had figured out exactly who I was. They had tracked down my profile on professional networking sites. They had found my social media pages. They knew exactly where I worked. The comments had mutated from making fun of my cheap suit to actively trying to ruin my real life. People were tagging the local public school district where I worked as an IT network administrator. They were leaving comments asking how a school district could hire such a pathetic loser to handle their secure network. Another comment with 10,000 likes said someone who looks that miserable probably steals computer parts from children. My stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. I felt physically sick. I dragged myself into the shower, letting the hot water burn my skin, trying to wash away the feeling of 200 people laughing at me. I put on my work clothes, a simple button-down shirt and slacks. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who looked 10 years older than 36. My eyes were completely bloodshot. My shoulders sagged under an invisible crushing weight. I walked out to my old Honda Civic and turned the key. The engine rattled, taking an extra second to turn over. The drive to the school district administration building usually took 20 minutes. Today, it felt like driving to my own funeral. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my joints ached. Every time I stopped at a red light, I looked at the drivers in the cars next to me, wondering if they had seen the video. Wondering if they recognized the pathetic brother from their social media feeds. When I pulled into the employee parking lot, my chest tightened. The administration building was a large brick structure with wide glass doors. Usually I walked through those doors feeling a sense of quiet pride. I kept the servers running. I kept the educational software online. I did my job quietly and efficiently. But today the building looked like a fortress, and I was an enemy trying to breach the gates. I walked through the front entrance and the atmosphere hit me immediately. The security guard at the front desk, a man I had exchanged friendly greetings with for 6 years, stopped smiling the second he saw me. He did not say good morning. He just stared at me, his eyes darting quickly down to his phone and back up to my face. He knew. I swiped my badge and walked into the main hallway. The air felt thick and suffocating. As I pushed open the double doors leading into the IT department, the usual morning chatter instantly died. It was not a gradual quiet. It was an immediate dead silence. 10 of my coworkers were standing around the coffee machine. The moment I stepped into the room, 10 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Nobody spoke. A few of them awkwardly cleared their throats. One guy, the junior technician, suddenly found his shoes incredibly interesting. The woman sitting at the front desk quickly minimized a window on her computer monitor, but I could clearly see the blue interface of a video player reflecting in her glasses. They had all seen it. I walked toward my cubicle, keeping my head high, trying to pretend the silence was not deafening. But as I passed the break room, I heard the whispers. It was that sharp hissing sound of people talking behind your back when they want you to know they are talking about you. I heard the word viral. I heard the word sister. I heard someone try to muffle a laugh. I sat down at my desk and pressed the power button on my computer. Before the login screen even appeared, my desk phone rang. The sound made me jump. I picked up the receiver. It was the receptionist for the superintendent. Her voice was cold and completely devoid of its usual warmth. "Samuel," she said, "the superintendent needs to see you in his office immediately." My heart dropped into my stomach. I hung up the phone and stood up. The walk from the IT department to the executive suite was exactly 10 minutes. It was a long, winding corridor that passed by the Human Resources Department, the Finance Office, and the main conference rooms. Today, that 10-minute walk was sheer agony. I stepped out of my cubicle and every single eye in the IT department followed me. I walked into the main corridor and the fluorescent lights above seemed to buzz louder than usual. The hallway was busy with morning traffic. Administrators carrying coffee, secretaries holding stacks of paperwork. But as I walked past them, the conversation stopped. People physically stepped out of my way as if failure was a contagious disease. I felt the heat rising in my face. Every step I took felt heavy and clumsy. I could feel their judgments pressing against my back. I could hear the faint sound of a video playing from an office down the hall, and I swore I could hear my sister laughing through the tiny phone speaker. The walk stretched out into an eternity. My mouth was bone dry. My palms were sweating. I was a professional. I was a grown man who had spent 6 years maintaining the digital backbone of this entire school district. But in that hallway, I was reduced to a joke, a walking punchline. When I finally reached the heavy wooden doors of the superintendent executive suite, I paused. I took a deep, trembling breath, trying to gather whatever dignity I had left. I reached out, grabbed the brass handle, and pushed the door open. The superintendent was a stern, image-obsessed man named Mr. Harrison. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk with his hands steepled together. Sitting in the leather chair next to him was the director of human resources, a woman named Brenda, who always wore a severe expression. Neither of them offered me a smile. Neither of them asked me to sit down. "Samuel," Mr. Harrison began, his voice flat and businesslike, "we have a very serious situation on our hands this morning." I remained standing, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. "I assumed this was about the video," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Brenda leaned forward, resting a thick folder on her lap. "To say it is about a video is a massive understatement, Samuel." She opened the folder and pulled out several printed sheets of paper. "Overnight, the school district's social media pages have been completely overrun. We have received over 2,000 comments on our public platforms. People are linking a viral video directly to this administration. They are questioning our hiring practices. They are flooding our public inbox with highly derogatory remarks." I looked at the printed papers. I could see screenshots of the comments. Vicious, cruel words written by complete strangers. Mr. Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the parking lot. "We are a public educational institution, Samuel. Our reputation is everything. We rely on public funding. We rely on the trust of the parents in this community. We cannot afford to be associated with this kind of digital circus." "But I did not make the video," I pleaded, stepping forward. "My sister filmed that without my permission. I was the victim of a cruel joke. I walked out of the room the moment it happened. I have done absolutely nothing wrong. I have been a dedicated employee here for 6 years. I have never had a single disciplinary issue." "You know my work, Mr. Harrison. You know I am a professional." Brenda sighed heavily, slipping the papers back into the folder. "Whether you are the victim or the instigator is entirely irrelevant to the current situation, Samuel. The fact remains that your face is currently attached to a highly embarrassing viral phenomenon. You are a public relations distraction. The parents are seeing this. The school board is seeing this. The local news has already called our press office asking for a statement regarding our IT administrator." My chest tightened so painfully I could barely draw breath. "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "You are punishing me because my family bullied me. You are punishing me because strangers on the internet decided to track down my employer. How is any of this my fault?" "We are not punishing you, Samuel," Mr. Harrison said, turning back to face me. "We are protecting the integrity of the school district. We need the narrative to cool down. We need this to blow over. Therefore, effective immediately, we are placing you on administrative leave." "Administrative leave?" I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "For how long?" "Indefinitely," Brenda answered without a shred of empathy. "And given the nature of this distraction and the fact that it involves off-duty conduct that reflects poorly on the district, this leave will be entirely unpaid." The room started to spin. Unpaid. My mind raced through my financial obligations. The rent on the duplex, the utilities, the car insurance, the massive secret payments I had been making for years just to keep my family afloat. I needed my paycheck. I survived paycheck to paycheck precisely because I gave everything else away. "You cannot do this to me," I begged, abandoning my pride. "Please, I need this job. I will stay in the server room. I will not come out during the day. Nobody has to see me. Just let me do my work. You cannot strip away my livelihood over a stupid internet video." Mr. Harrison sat back down in his heavy leather chair and picked up his pen, dismissing me entirely. "The decision is final, Samuel. We will contact you when the board has completed a full review of the situation. Please hand your security badge and your office keys to Brenda. You are instructed to clear out your desk and leave the premises within the next 20 minutes." The visceral unfairness of the moment hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The system was designed to protect itself. It did not care about the truth. It did not care about my 6 years of flawless service. It did not care that I was bleeding out emotionally. All it cared about was maintaining a pristine public image. My sister had destroyed my reputation for a few laughs at a country club, and the ripple effect had just destroyed my financial survival. My hands shook violently as I unclipped my security badge from my belt. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key to the server room. The room I had built. The network I had maintained. I placed the badge and the key onto Brenda's folder. The plastic and metal clicked loudly in the silent office. Neither of them said a word as I turned and walked out the door. The walk back to my cubicle was a blur. I grabbed an empty cardboard box from the supply closet. When I returned to the IT department, the silence was still absolute. My coworkers watched me from the corners of their eyes as I began tossing my life into the box. My framed photo of Claire, my favorite coffee mug, the reference manuals I had bought with my own money. Every item felt incredibly heavy. No one came over to say goodbye. No one offered a word of comfort. I was toxic. I was a public relations nightmare that nobody wanted to touch. I picked up the box and walked back out into the bright fluorescent hallway. I pushed through the front glass doors of the administration building and stepped back out into the morning air. The sun was shining perfectly, but my entire world had gone completely dark. I walked to my battered Honda Civic and placed the cardboard box on the passenger seat. I sat behind the steering wheel and stared blankly through the windshield. Less than 12 hours ago, I was just the quiet, invisible brother trying to get through an anniversary party. Now I was unemployed. I was a viral joke. My livelihood had been completely stripped away, all because my sister wanted to feel like the most important person in the room. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving my career behind me. I drove toward my empty duplex, completely unaware that the worst part of this nightmare was actually waiting for me the moment I walked through my own front door. I drove through the city streets completely numb. The suspension from my job felt like a physical weight crushing my lungs. Every time I stopped at a red light, the faces of the human resources director and the superintendent flashed behind my eyes. They had stripped away my livelihood in a matter of minutes to protect their public image. I gripped the steering wheel of my battered Honda Civic until my knuckles turned bone white. I just needed to get home. I needed the quiet safety of my own space. More than anything, I needed Claire. I needed the woman I was going to marry to look me in the eyes and tell me we were going to survive this nightmare together. I pulled into the narrow driveway of our duplex. The afternoon sun was bright, but the entire world looked gray to me. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing. I rehearsed what I was going to say to her. I planned to tell her about the viral video and the horrible comments, and how the school district had escorted me out of the building like a criminal. I stepped out of the car and walked up the concrete path to the front door. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open, and the first thing I noticed was the echo. My shoes clicked against the cheap laminate flooring, but the sound bounced off bare walls. I walked into the living room and froze. The space was half empty. The television was gone, leaving a clean rectangular shadow on the dusty console table. The soft gray area rug Claire had bought for us last Christmas was missing. Her favorite reading chair, the floor lamp, and the decorative pillows were all gone. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my veins. I walked down the short, narrow hallway toward our bedroom. The door was wide open. Claire was standing near the closet. She was violently yanking clothes off the wooden hangers and throwing them into a massive black suitcase on the bed. She did not even look up when my shadow fell across the doorway. She just kept packing with a frantic mechanical efficiency. "Claire," I said, my voice cracking. "What are you doing?" She zipped the first suitcase shut with a sharp, aggressive motion that echoed in the empty room. Finally, she turned to look at me. Her face was flushed, but her eyes were completely cold. There was no sympathy in her expression. There was no love. She looked at me the way a person looks at a stain on the sidewalk. "I am packing, Samuel," she said flatly. I am leaving. I stepped fully into the room, my hands raised in a desperate, pleading gesture. You cannot leave, I begged. You do not understand what has happened to me today. I just lost my job. The school district placed me on unpaid administrative leave because of the video. They told me I was a public relations distraction. I have nothing left, Claire. I need you right now. Claire let out a short, bitter laugh. She crossed her arms over her chest and stared at me with pure disgust. Of course you lost your job, Samuel. Because you do not know how to defend yourself. You just stand there and take it. You let people walk all over you and you never fight back. I stared at her in shock. I did not make the video, I said, my voice trembling. Chloe did this to me. She humiliated me in front of 200 people. You were there. You saw what happened. Yes, I was there, she snapped, stepping closer to me, her voice rising into a shout. I was standing right next to you while your teenage sister called you a pathetic failure on a microphone. I had to stand there and watch every wealthy, successful person in this city laugh at the man I am supposed to marry. Do you have any idea how incredibly humiliating that was for me? She turned back to the closet and grabbed an armful of shoes, tossing them into a second duffel bag. But the party was not even the worst part. She continued, her back turned to me. I woke up this morning and my phone was exploding. My friends from college sent me the video. My coworkers sent me the video. It is everywhere, Samuel. Millions of people are watching it. I read the comments. I read thousands of comments calling you a broke loser who dresses like a substitute teacher. They are making fun of your car. They are making fun of your house. They are making fun of your life. It is just the internet, Claire. I pleaded, feeling the tears finally burning the edges of my eyes. It is not real life. The internet will forget about this in a week. It is real life, she yelled, spinning around to face me. That video is exactly who you are. Chloe was right. You are a cautionary tale. Look at your brother-in-law. Trent is launching real estate funds and buying custom suits. Your sister is wearing diamonds. And what are you doing? You are pushing 40 and you live in a cheap rented duplex driving a car that belongs in a junkyard. You have zero ambition. You let your parents treat you like garbage and you never say a word. I work hard, I whispered, feeling my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces inside my chest. I provide for us. You provide the bare minimum. Samuel, she said, her voice dropping into a cruel, mocking whisper. I thought you had potential when we met. I thought you would eventually step up and demand your piece of the family fortune. I thought you would become a partner in whatever empire your parents were building. But you are just the IT guy. You will always be just the IT guy. And now you do not even have that. She grabbed the handles of her suitcase and dragged it off the bed. The heavy wheels hit the floor with a loud thud. I am not going to be shackled to a sinking ship, Samuel, she said, looking me dead in the eyes. I am not going to attach my name to the biggest joke on the internet. I want a man who commands respect. I want a man who actually matters. You are never going to be that man. I stood completely paralyzed as she walked right past me. Her shoulder bumped heavily against my chest, but I did not try to stop her. I could not speak. My throat was sealed shut by a thick, agonizing knot of grief. I listened to the sound of the plastic suitcase wheels rolling down the hallway. I heard the front door open and then slam shut. A minute later, I heard the engine of her car start in the driveway. The sound of the tires rolling backward into the street faded away, taking the last remaining piece of my future with it. I was completely alone. I sank down onto the bare mattress. The room felt massive and cold. I looked at the empty spaces in the closet where her dresses used to hang. I looked at the bare nightstand where her jewelry box used to sit. The silence in the duplex was absolute and terrifying. My chest heaved as I struggled to pull air into my lungs. The sequence of events played on a violent, looping loop in my mind. The blinding spotlight at the country club, the cruel, echoing laughter of the crowd, the cold dismissal from the school superintendent, and now the devastating venom of the woman I loved. I bent forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and buried my face in my hands. I felt the physical sensation of hitting rock bottom. It was a dark, suffocating hole with no light and no way out. I was a failure. I was exactly what my sister said I was. Then the silence of the empty house was violently shattered. My phone started ringing in my pocket. The loud default ringtone echoed sharply off the bare walls, making me flinch. I slowly pulled the phone out of my pocket and looked at the cracked, glowing screen. The caller identification read, Mom. I stared at the name for a long time while the phone continued to ring. A pathetic, desperate spark of hope flared to life in the darkness of my chest. Maybe she had seen the catastrophic internet backlash. Maybe she had read the terrible comments and realized how far Chloe had crossed the line. Maybe my mother was calling to apologize. Maybe she was calling to check on her oldest son to ask if I was okay to tell me she loved me and that the family would make this right. I swiped my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Mom. I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Samuel Higgins, where on earth did you go last night? Her voice barked through the speaker. The tone was not soft. It was not worried. It was sharp, piercing, and filled with intense annoyance. The tiny spark of hope in my chest instantly died, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. You completely ruined the professional family portraits, she continued, not giving me a second to speak. The photographer charged us an absolute fortune to stay an extra hour at the country club, and you were nowhere to be found. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to explain your absence to the country club president? We had to take the generational family photos without you. Chloe looked absolutely stunning, and Trent looked like a movie star, but the symmetry of the photo is entirely off because you decided to throw a silent tantrum and leave early. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed. She did not care about the viral video. She did not care that 200 people had just laughed at my expense. She did not care about my humiliation. She only cared about the visual aesthetic of her anniversary photos. Mom, I tried to say, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. I just lost my job today. Listen to me, Samuel. I do not have time for you to sulk right now, she interrupted, cutting me off completely. I am incredibly busy managing the post-party logistics. I am actually calling you because we have a slight financial emergency regarding the event. A financial emergency? I repeated blankly. Yes, she sighed heavily into the phone as if explaining a simple concept to a slow child. Chloe and Trent went all out to make it a perfectly elite night for your father and me. They really spared no expense on the floral arrangements and the imported champagne. But the extra catering costs pushed them slightly over their limit for the month. The country club venue manager is demanding the final balance this morning. Trent simply cannot fit the extra charge on his platinum credit card right now because his liquid funds are temporarily tied up in his massive new commercial real estate expansion. She paused, taking a quick breath before delivering the final fatal blow. I need you to transfer $2,000 to my checking account immediately, she said casually. You can just pull it from your savings. Do not make a big deal out of this, Samuel. We do not need any more of your drama. It is your basic duty to step up and help out when the family needs it. Send the money before noon, please. I have to go to a brunch appointment. Click. The call ended. The dial tone hummed softly against my ear. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. I sat completely motionless, staring at the blank wall of my empty bedroom. She wanted $2,000. She wanted me, the son they had just publicly crucified, to pay for the very party where my execution had taken place. She wanted me to fund the extravagant lifestyle of the sister who had just destroyed my career. She wanted me to cover the bills for the slick brother-in-law who had stood on a stage and laughed in my face. For 6 years I had taken their insults. I had worn cheap suits. I had driven a failing car. I had lived in a cramped, unrenovated duplex. I had let them call me a failure. I had swallowed my pride every single time they flaunted their designer clothes and their luxury vacations. I had accepted the role of the invisible, pathetic brother. But as I sat there in the terrifying silence of my broken life, something deep inside the architecture of my mind simply snapped. It was not a loud, explosive break. It was a quiet, structural collapse. The profound, crippling depression that had been drowning me for the past 12 hours evaporated. The grief over losing Claire vanished. The panic over losing my job disappeared. In their place, a terrifying, freezing clarity flooded my brain. I looked down at my rough, calloused hands. They wanted $2,000 because Trent could not fit it on his credit card. Trent the millionaire. Trent the visionary investor. Trent the man who was supposedly carrying the Higgins family legacy into the future. I stood up from the bed. My breathing was perfectly steady now. My heart rate slowed down to a calm, rhythmic pulse. The victim, Samuel Higgins, who cowered in the spotlight, was dead. The man who remained standing in the empty room was an auditor, and it was finally time to collect the debts. I walked out of the bedroom and headed straight for my home office. I walked past the empty spaces where Claire's belongings used to be, but I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow. I opened the door to my small office and walked directly to the back wall closet. I got down on my knees and pushed aside a stack of old cardboard boxes. Hidden in the dark corner, resting heavily against the floorboards, was a thick, reinforced fireproof lockbox. They wanted to call me a failure. They wanted to pretend they were royalty while I was the peasant sweeping the dirt at their feet. They thought they had built an empire, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. I owned the dirt they were standing on. I sat on the edge of the bare mattress, staring at the blank wall of my empty bedroom. The dial tone of my phone had long since faded into a heavy, dead silence, but my mother's voice kept echoing in my skull. "I need you to transfer $2,000 to my checking account immediately." She had said it with the casual irritation of someone asking a servant to sweep the dirt off the floor. My fiancé had just walked out the door with half my furniture. My career had been suspended because of a viral humiliation orchestrated by my own sister. And my mother did not care at all. She only cared that her golden son-in-law Trent could not afford the catering bill for her country club anniversary party. For 6 grueling years, I had played the exact role they assigned to me. I was Samuel, the quiet failure. Samuel, the invisible. IT guy who drove a rattling Honda Civic. Samuel, the ultimate disappointment who lived in a cramped duplex on the completely wrong side of town. I had let them look down their noses at me. I had let them make their passive-aggressive jokes at family dinners. I had kept my mouth shut while Chloe flaunted her designer jewelry and Trent bragged about his massive commercial real estate expansions. I had swallowed my pride every single time because I truly believed that family meant sacrifice. I believed that holding the foundation together meant staying in the dark so they could stand in the light. But as I sat in that empty room, a profound chemical shift happened inside my brain. The crushing depression that had been paralyzing me all morning simply evaporated. The heavy, suffocating grief over losing Claire vanished like smoke in the wind. The absolute panic over my lost paycheck was entirely gone. In their place, a terrifying, freezing clarity flooded my veins. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused and rough from years of running cables and fixing heavy hardware. I thought about Trent standing in his custom Italian tuxedo laughing at me under the bright ballroom spotlight. Trent the millionaire. Trent the visionary investor. Trent the man who could not even afford a catering bill without secretly begging his pathetic brother-in-law to bail him out of his own financial incompetence. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of my mother's phone call acted like a match thrown directly into a massive pool of gasoline. It burned away the thick fog of my victimhood. I was not the victim of this family. I never was. I was their host, and they were the parasites draining the life out of me to fund their fake royalty. I stood up from the bed. My legs were no longer shaking. My breathing was perfectly steady. I walked out of the bedroom and headed down the narrow hallway toward my home office. I walked past the empty spaces in the living room where Claire had packed up her life, but I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow or regret. Claire wanted a man who commanded respect. She wanted a man who was not a sinking ship. What she did not realize was that I was the only thing keeping the entire Higgins family fleet from plunging directly to the bottom of the ocean. I opened the door to my small office. It was a cramped space filled with spare computer parts and stacked textbooks. I walked directly to the back wall and opened the small closet door. I got down on my knees and pushed aside a stack of heavy cardboard boxes filled with old tax records and network manuals. Hidden in the absolute darkest corner of the closet, resting heavily against the raw floorboards, was a thick, reinforced fireproof lockbox. I grabbed the heavy metal handle and dragged the box out into the light. The steel scraped loudly against the floor. It weighed almost 50 pounds. But the physical weight of the box was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological weight of the secrets locked inside it. I wiped a thick layer of dust off the top and stared at the mechanical combination dial. They wanted to call me a failure. They wanted to pretend they were the elite upper class of the city, while I was the peasant sweeping the dirt at their feet. They thought they had built an unbreakable empire of wealth and high status. But they had forgotten one crucial, terrifying detail. I was the silent architect of their survival. I reached out and placed my fingers on the cold metal dial. I turned it right, then left, then right again, entering the sequence of numbers I had memorized perfectly over the years. The heavy internal tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying, solid sound. I gripped the two heavy latches on the sides of the box and flipped them upward. I pulled the heavy lid open, and the smell of old paper and stale ink filled the small room. There were no gold bars inside. There were no stacks of $100 bills or hidden antique jewelry. But what lay inside that box was worth far more than gold. It was pure, unadulterated leverage. It was the physical paper trail of their absolute destruction. I reached into the box and pulled out the first thick stack of manila folders. I laid them out across my cheap wooden desk, smoothing my hands over the rough paper. I was no longer Samuel the emotional punching bag reacting to their cruelty. I was Samuel the auditor, and it was finally time to review the accounts. I opened the first folder. It was labeled with Trent and Chloe's names in black marker. I sifted through the massive stack of papers, pulling out a bundle of heavily redacted bank statements and legal notices. My eyes scanned the familiar, threatening red ink of the Internal Revenue Service and various collection agencies. My mind flashed back to a specific night 3 years ago. Chloe had just posted a photo on Instagram standing on the bow of a rented yacht in Miami, holding a brand new limited edition designer bag that cost more than my entire vehicle. The caption read, "Living the absolute dream with my king." Her followers had flooded the comments with praise and blind jealousy. But what the internet did not see was what happened exactly 48 hours later. Trent had shown up at my duplex in the middle of the night, shaking and sweating profusely through his expensive designer dress shirt. His supposed massive real estate firm was nothing but a hollow shell company propped up by high-interest loans and unpaid taxes. He was completely broke. The government was threatening him with a massive tax lien and federal prison time for blatant tax evasion. He had begged me on his hands and knees, crying like a terrified child on my cheap living room rug. He swore if he went to federal prison, Chloe would leave him, and their perfect public life would be completely destroyed. So the pathetic failure of a brother had driven to the bank the very next morning and wired the money directly to the government to keep Trent out of a concrete jail cell. Every single time Chloe bought a designer bag or a diamond necklace, Trent defaulted on a major loan. And every single time he defaulted, he came crawling to me in the dark, away from the country club, crowds, away from the cameras to beg for another massive financial bailout. I looked at the wire transfer receipts stapled directly to the government notices. They were undeniable proof of every single dime I had bled to keep their plastic crown from falling off their heads. I shoved Trent's folder aside and pulled out the next one. This one was even thicker. It belonged to my parents, Richard and Susan Higgins, the grand pillars of the community, the elite socialites who looked at me with profound embarrassment because I wore an off-the-rack suit to their precious anniversary gala. I opened the folder and spread the documents out on the desk. mortgage delinquency notices, severe overdraft fees, final demands for payment from high-limit credit card companies. My parents had spent the last decade living a lavish lifestyle they absolutely could not afford, just to impress people who did not actually care about them. They threw massive country club parties. They bought imported luxury cars. They donated thousands to local political campaigns to secure their fake VIP status. But behind closed doors, they were drowning in a violent sea of red ink. My mother would call me crying hysterically, saying the bank was going to humiliate them in front of all their friends. My father would sit in his dark study, refusing to look me in the eye as he asked me to cover their home equity line of credit because his investments had completely tanked, and they had absolutely zero liquid cash left. I pulled out a specific bank statement from 2 years ago. My parents had hosted a massive charity dinner that week, pretending to be grand philanthropists. My father had given a speech about the importance of wealth building and generational success. He had pointed to Trent as the shining example of the Higgins legacy. He had ignored my existence completely. The very next morning, I had quietly emptied my savings to pay their defaulted property taxes so the county would not seize their home and auction it off on the courthouse steps. For 6 agonizing years, I had been the invisible safety net, keeping my entire family out of bankruptcy court and federal prison. I had willingly sacrificed my own American dream to fund their pathetic American illusion. That is exactly why I drove a rattling Honda Civic. That is exactly why I lived in a duplex with a leaky roof. That is why I could not afford to take Claire on the luxury vacations she constantly begged for. Every extra dollar I earned from side jobs and late-night consulting gigs was instantly swallowed by my family's bottomless pit of vanity and pride. They had drained me entirely dry, and then they had the absolute nerve to stand on a stage, point a spotlight at my face, and call me a failure in front of 200 people. I picked up the documents, holding them tightly in my fists. I looked at the exact numbers printed on the official bank letterheads. The sheer volume of their lies was absolutely staggering. They were flat broke. They were worse than broke. They were frauds wearing incredibly expensive masks. And they actually believed that because I was quiet, because I was loyal, because I never threw their massive failures in their faces, that I was weak. They fundamentally mistook my silence for submission. They mistook my sacrifice for absolute stupidity. I gathered the folders carefully, aligning the edges of the paper, and placed them back into the fireproof lockbox. I did not feel sad anymore. I did not feel the sting of my sister's cruel words or the sharp pain of my mother's greedy phone call. I felt a surge of pure, terrifying power. I held the absolute destruction of the Higgins family right in my calloused hands. The receipts were all right here. The paper trail was completely undeniable and legally binding. They wanted the world to know exactly who we were. They wanted to make our family dynamics a matter of public digital record. They wanted millions of people to see the millionaire sister carrying the broke, pathetic brother. They wanted everyone to look at the Golden family and applaud their flawless success. I closed the heavy lid of the lockbox and snapped the thick metal latches shut. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet room, sealing my decision. If they wanted a massive public spectacle, I was finally ready to give them one. They had built their entire elite universe on my breaking back, and it was finally time for me to stand up and let their fake, glittering empire crash straight into the ground. I spread the documents across the scratched surface of my cheap wooden desk. The paper was crisp, unforgiving, and heavy with absolute truth. The first stack belonged to Trent. I pulled out a perfectly preserved notice of federal tax lien. It was an official government document that terrified ordinary people, but Trent had tried to treat it like a minor administrative inconvenience when he brought it to me. The amount printed in bold black ink was exactly $42,000. The Internal Revenue Service was not threatening to fine his hollow real estate firm. They were threatening to indict him for active federal tax evasion. I remember the exact night he handed me this letter. It was raining, and he had shown up at my duplex, shaking and sweating profusely through his expensive designer dress shirt. His supposed massive commercial real estate firm was nothing but a fragile shell company propped up by high-interest loans and unpaid taxes. He was completely broke. He had begged me on his hands and knees, crying like a terrified child right on my living room rug. He swore that if he went to federal prison, Chloe would leave him and their perfect public life would be completely destroyed. So the pathetic failure of a brother had driven to the bank the very next morning and wired $42,000 directly to the United States Treasury. I drained my high-yield savings account to absolute zero just to keep him out of a concrete jail cell. And what did Trent do the week after the lien was officially released? He bought a vintage Rolex watch and posted a picture of it online with a caption boasting about the rewards of his relentless grinding. He was a complete fraud. Every single fiber of his success was purchased with my quiet sweat. I shoved Trent's file to the corner of the desk and picked up the next folder. This one was incredibly thick and heavy with the financial incompetence of my own parents. Richard and Susan Higgins portrayed themselves as local aristocrats. They sat on elite charity boards. They hosted extravagant country club dinner parties. But sitting right in front of me was a massive stack of final demand letters from a major national bank, a home equity line of credit default. $65,000. My father had taken out a massive line of credit against their home to fund a catastrophic investment in a tech startup, hoping to double his money and secure his country club retirement. When the startup went bankrupt, my father simply ignored the bank notices. He ignored the phone calls. He kept buying custom golf clubs and paying for imported wine while the interest compounded into a suffocating mountain of debt. When the bank finally threatened to initiate aggressive collection proceedings, my mother called me. She did not ask for help. She demanded it. She told me it was my basic obligation as a son to protect the family name from public embarrassment. I liquidated the stock portfolio I had been quietly building since my early 20s. I marched into the bank branch and handed the teller a certified cashier's check for $65,000. I saved their reputation. I saved their elite social standing. I wiped their slate completely clean so they could go right back to looking down their noses at me. But the final document in the lockbox was my absolute masterpiece. I reached into the very bottom of the heavy steel box and carefully pulled out a thick leather-bound legal folio. It was not a bank statement. It was not a receipt for a wire transfer. It was an official assignment of mortgage and deed of trust registered directly with the county clerk. 3 years ago, my parents' financial negligence finally caught up with them in a way that a simple cash bailout could not fix. They were exactly 24 hours away from the bank foreclosing on their massive 4-bedroom suburban estate. The house with the perfectly manicured lawn and the grand mahogany doors. The house where they had just hosted their anniversary party and laughed at my expense. My father had secretly stopped paying the primary mortgage altogether to fund a lavish European vacation for him and my mother. The bank was completely done negotiating. They wanted to seize the property. When my father finally confessed the truth, he looked at me like I was a magical automated teller machine. He told me to just pay the arrears and make the problem go away. But I did not do that. I did not just pay the bank to cover his tracks. I hired an aggressive commercial real estate attorney. I bypassed my parents entirely and approached the bank directly as an independent private investor. I bought the defaulted note. I purchased the exact debt that my parents owed. The legal paperwork sitting in my hands proved an undeniable, terrifying truth. Richard and Susan Higgins did not own the roof over their heads. I owned it. I was the bank. I held the legal deed to the 4-bedroom estate they paraded around in. For 3 years, I had allowed them to live in my house completely rent-free under a quiet tenancy agreement. I paid the property taxes every single quarter. I paid the premium home insurance. I maintained the structural integrity of the massive asset while they walked across the hardwood floors and treated me like absolute garbage. I picked up a black pen and pulled a blank sheet of paper from the top drawer of my desk. I wrote down the numbers in large, heavy strokes. $42,000 to the Internal Revenue Service for Trent. $65,000 to cover the defaulted home equity line of credit for my parents, $80,000 in pure cash to purchase the defaulted primary mortgage note and secure the deed to their estate. I drew a thick black line underneath the three numbers. I added them together. $187,000. $187,000 in pure liquid cash. I stared at the total until the numbers burned into my retinas. The sheer magnitude of that number in the context of my current life was profoundly staggering. That number was the exact reason I woke up in a freezing duplex every single morning. It was the reason I drove a battered Honda Civic with a failing transmission and a peeling paint job. It was the reason I wore 5-year-old off-the-rack suits to formal events. It was the reason my fiancée had just packed her bags and walked out the door calling me a broke, unmotivated loser who would never amount to anything. I had completely sacrificed my own American dream to constantly fund their American illusion. If I had kept that money, I could have bought a beautiful home in the absolute best neighborhood in the city. I could have driven a brand new luxury car off the dealership lot in pure cash. I could have taken Claire on the extravagant tropical vacations she desperately craved. I could have built a life of total financial independence and absolute comfort. Instead, I had bled myself dry, pouring every single dollar I earned into a bottomless black hole of my family's vanity. I had traded my entire future for their fragile, pathetic egos. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a quiet, compliant workhorse who lacked the basic intelligence to build a successful life for himself. They thought my cheap clothes and my modest network administrator job were undeniable signs of deep personal failure. But the truth was sitting right here on my desk. My modest life was not a failure. It was the heavy, bloody cost of their fake success. I picked up the assignment of mortgage document. The thick legal paper felt incredibly powerful between my fingers. I traced the embossed seal of the county clerk with my thumb, feeling the rough texture of the stamp. My mother had just demanded $2,000 over the phone to pay for a country club catering bill. She had demanded it with absolute arrogance, completely oblivious to the fact that she was speaking to the legal owner of her home. Chloe had stood in a blinding spotlight and called me a cautionary tale to an audience of 200 people while her husband secretly owed me his physical freedom. The profound rage that had been buried deep inside my chest for 6 grueling years finally broke through the surface. But it was not a hot, explosive anger. It was a cold, calculating, surgical wrath. The kind of wrath that does not shout or scream or throw things across the room. The kind of wrath that meticulously plans a total, absolute demolition. They had pushed me to the absolute edge of human endurance. They had stripped away my career. They had chased away my future wife. They had humiliated me in front of the most powerful people in our city. They had taken everything from me until I had absolutely nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on the planet. I looked at the total again. $187,000. I did not need to scream at them to defend my honor. I did not need to post a defensive video on the internet explaining my side of the story to a crowd of mocking strangers. I did not need to beg for their respect or their understanding. I held the physical receipts right in my hands. I held the undisputed, legally binding proof of their entire fraudulent existence. With a single phone call to my attorney, I could initiate immediate eviction proceedings against my parents. I could legally throw them out into the street and seize the 4-bedroom suburban estate they loved more than their own son. With a single phone call to the Internal Revenue Service, I could unseal Trent's tax records and expose his shell company to every single one of his private investors. I could dismantle their entire glittering universe piece by piece, brick by brick, until there was absolutely nothing left but dust. I leaned back in my cheap office chair. The worn foam padding squeaked loudly under my weight. I looked around my small, cramped home office. For the first time in my entire life, I did not feel ashamed of my modest surroundings. I felt like a king sitting in an impenetrable fortress of truth. Let them laugh at me. Let the internet comment section call me a pathetic loser. Let the image-obsessed school board place me on unpaid leave for being a public relations distraction. Let Claire pack her heavy suitcases and run away searching for a man who commanded more respect. None of it mattered anymore. The rules of the game had completely changed. The victim, Samuel Higgins, was gone. The quiet brother who took the punches and swallowed his pride to keep the peace was permanently dead. I gathered the heavy legal documents and stacked them into a neat, perfect pile in the center of my desk. I placed the legal folio with the deed to my parents' house right on top. I was going to let them enjoy their fake victory for just a little while longer. I was going to let Trent boast about his massive new real estate funds to anyone who would listen. I was going to let Chloe bask in the viral internet fame she so desperately craved. I was going to let them climb as high as they possibly could, because the higher they climbed, the more devastating the fall was going to be. 2 weeks passed in complete and utter silence. While my phone constantly vibrated with frantic text messages and missed calls from my parents and my sister, I did not answer a single one. I let the battery die. I charged it. I watched the names flash across the cracked screen, and I let it go straight to voicemail. The digital circus surrounding the viral video continued to rage online, but I was completely detached from it. The school district human resources department sent me a formal letter confirming my unpaid administrative leave. Claire never came back for the rest of her things. I was a ghost in my own life. But inside the walls of my cramped duplex, I was not wallowing in misery. I was working. I spent 14 days meticulously organizing the contents of the fireproof lockbox. I cross-referenced every single wire transfer, every defaulted loan notice, and every property tax receipt. I built a timeline of their financial negligence that was so legally airtight it could withstand a federal audit. I was waiting for them to make their next move. I knew they would. They were parasites, and a parasite cannot survive for long without its host. The inevitable confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking a cup of black coffee, when a series of loud, aggressive knocks rattled my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of someone who believed they owned whatever space they were stepping into. I stood up, walked down the narrow hallway, and pulled the front door open. Trent stood on my small concrete porch holding a massive golf umbrella. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than my first car. A gold Rolex gleamed on his wrist. His Italian leather shoes were perfectly polished, completely out of place on my chipped linoleum floor as he pushed his way inside without waiting for an invitation. He shook the rain off his umbrella and looked around my modest living room with an expression of profound physical disgust. "You are a really difficult guy to track down these days," Samuel Trent said. His voice was dripping with that familiar, arrogant country club charm. He closed his umbrella and leaned it against my cheap drywall. "You have been completely off the grid. Your mother has been calling you for 2 weeks. Chloe has been trying to text you. You just vanished." I stood my ground near the front door. I did not offer him a seat. I did not offer him a drink. I just stared at him, my face a perfectly blank mask. "What do you want, Trent?" Trent let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "What do I want? I want you to start acting like a grown man and stop throwing this pathetic little pity party." He began to pace across my living room floor, stepping over the rectangular outline in the carpet where the television Claire took used to be. "Do you have any idea how much stress you are causing Richard and Susan? They are highly respected members of this community, Samuel. They have reputations to uphold, and right now they are dealing with the fallout of your embarrassing little viral moment and your sudden disappearance." I watched him pace. I watched his expensive shoes step on my cheap rug. He was lecturing me about reputation. The man whose tax lien I had paid with my own sweat and blood was standing in my house lecturing me about acting like a man. "I lost my job, Trent," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "The school district placed me on unpaid leave because Chloe posted that video. Claire packed her bags and left me because of that video. I am not throwing a pity party. I am dealing with the destruction of my life. Trent rolled his eyes and waved his hand dismissively as if my ruined career was a minor traffic jam. Oh, please, Samuel, do not be so incredibly dramatic. You worked a dead-end government IT job. You were making what, maybe $60,000 a year. You can find another desk to sit behind. And as for Claire, she was always looking for an exit strategy anyway. A woman like that wants a winner. She wants a guy who actually commands a room, not a guy who stands in the corner drinking tap water. You should be thanking us for exposing the cracks in your little relationship. The sheer narcissism radiating from his body was suffocating. He actually believed he had done me a favor. He believed the entire world revolved around the Higgins family and I was just an ungrateful extra in their movie. But that is not why I am here. Trent continued, stopping his pacing and turning to face me directly. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a hard, demanding glare. I am here because you missed a very important deadline. Susan called me yesterday completely panicked. The county just sent a final notice for the quarterly property taxes on the estate. The bill is overdue, Samuel. Susan said you usually handle the tax portal transfers for them, and you have been ignoring her reminders. I stared at him. The audacity was almost magnificent. He had shown up at my house to collect a debt that was not even his. He was acting as the enforcer for my parents, trying to bully me into opening my wallet. Why do they not pay it themselves? Trent, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. If they are so wealthy and so successful, why are they panicking over a quarterly property tax bill? Trent stepped closer to me, his jaw tightening. Do not play stupid with me, Samuel. You know exactly how their wealth is structured. They are asset-rich, but right now their liquid cash is temporarily tied up in some massive long-term investments. They rely on you to handle these minor administrative expenses. It is your duty to this family. You live a completely cheap single life while they maintain the legacy. You have no real expenses. The least you can do is handle the municipal paperwork so they do not have to stress about it. I do not have the money, Trent, I said. I am on unpaid leave. I have zero income. Trent laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed in the empty room. Find the money, Samuel. Liquidate whatever pathetic savings account you have left. Take out a personal loan. I really do not care how you do it. But you are going to pay that tax bill by Friday. Because if you do not step up and do your duty to this family, I am going to make things a lot worse for you. I tilted my head slightly. Worse for me? How exactly are you going to do that? Trent leaned in so close I could smell his expensive cologne. I am a very well-connected man, Samuel. I have friends on the school board. I have friends in the local media. If you decide to abandon your parents and let their estate fall into tax delinquency, I will personally make sure every single professional contact in this city knows exactly what kind of ungrateful deadbeat you really are. I will call Claire myself and tell her exactly how you are treating your own flesh and blood. You think that viral video was bad. I can make you completely unemployable in this state. Do not test me. I looked into Trent's eyes. They were wide with arrogant authority. He honestly thought he held all the cards. He thought he was the ultimate alpha male standing over a defeated peasant. He had absolutely no idea that he was threatening the man who held the undisputed legal deed to the very house he was talking about. He did not know that the property tax he was demanding I pay was actually my own property tax. My parents had clearly hidden the truth of their massive financial collapse from him, or he was too blinded by his own ego to see it. I took a slow breath, letting his threat hang in the silent air of the duplex. Okay, Trent, I said softly, playing the role of the defeated brother. I understand. You are busy building empires. My parents are busy maintaining their legacy. I am just supposed to foot the bill. But if you are so incredibly successful, why do you not just pay the property tax yourself? $2,000 should be pocket change for a guy like you. That simple question was the bait. I knew Trent could never resist an opportunity to brag about his own financial genius. His fragile ego required constant validation, and I had just given him the perfect excuse to monologue about his greatness. Trent scoffed, straightening his custom jacket. Pocket change. It is not about the money, Samuel. It is about the principle. But since your tiny brain probably cannot comprehend high-level finance, I will spell it out for you. I cannot just throw cash at your parents' municipal bills right now, because every single liquid dollar I have is currently moving through a massive commercial acquisition. I am launching a brand new real estate investment fund. He began pacing again, his chest puffed out like a proud rooster. He was completely caught up in his own hype. I am talking about a massive redevelopment project right in the heart of the downtown commercial district. I am bringing in huge players. We are going to buy up 3 entire city blocks and turn them into luxury mixed-use commercial spaces. This is the kind of legacy-building wealth that you will never understand. That sounds very ambitious, Trent, I said, keeping my tone completely neutral. But a project that size requires massive capital. How are you funding it? Trent stopped and flashed me a bright predatory smile. Exactly. It requires massive capital. And that is why I am securing a $500,000 bridge loan this week. I have a group of very wealthy, very exclusive private investors from the country club and the community church. They are ready to wire $500,000 into my holding account by Friday morning. They believe in my vision. They know a guaranteed return on investment when they see one. I watched his mouth move. A $500,000 bridge loan. Private investors from the church. The scale of the money he was talking about was staggering, especially for a man who had been crying on my floor over a $42,000 tax lien just 3 years ago. But a bridge loan from private investors requires heavy collateral. Trent, I pointed out casually, leaning against the wall. A group of wealthy church members is not going to just hand you $500,000 based on a smile and a handshake. They need hard physical assets to secure the loan. And since you just told me all your cash is tied up, what exactly are you using for collateral? Trent let out a loud, triumphant laugh. He pointed his finger at me as if I had finally asked an intelligent question. That is the genius of Family Samuel. That is what you will never comprehend. You work together to build the empire. Richard and Susan understand the vision. They know that my success is Chloe's success, and Chloe's success elevates the entire Higgins name. So when I told them I needed a hard asset to back the bridge loan, they practically begged me to use the suburban estate. The air in the room suddenly went completely still. I stopped breathing. The sound of the rain hitting the roof of the duplex faded away into absolute nothingness. I stared at Trent, my brain processing the words he had just spoken. You are using my parents' house as collateral for a $500,000 commercial bridge loan. Trent nodded proudly, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. Exactly. The estate is completely paid off, according to Richard. It is a prime piece of real estate sitting in the most exclusive zip code in the county. It is worth well over $1 million. We drafted the pledge agreement last week. Richard and Susan signed the paperwork pledging the deed of the house as the primary collateral for my investment fund. The title agency is finalizing the paperwork as we speak. The investors are totally secured, and I get the $500,000 in pure liquid cash to start the downtown acquisitions. It is a flawless financial maneuver. My mind felt like a supercomputer processing 1 billion calculations per second. Richard and Susan had told him the house was completely paid off. They had lied to their golden boy. They had hidden the fact that they had defaulted on their mortgage 3 years ago. They had hidden the fact that their pathetic invisible son had bought the defaulted note from the bank. They had signed legal pledge agreements offering a house they did not own to a group of wealthy church investors. And Trent was taking that fraudulent pledge agreement and using it to extract $500,000 across state banking lines. You cannot use a piece of property as collateral when your name is not on the deed. When the title agency ran the final deep check, they would see the lien. But until then, Trent was actively participating in a massive documented federal wire and mortgage fraud scheme. And he had just confessed the entire operation to me while standing in my living room bragging about his superior intellect. You used their house, I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You are securing a commercial loan with a residential property deed. Do not look so shocked, Samuel. Trent sneered, grabbing his umbrella from the wall. It is just business. It is high-level leverage. The loan will be paid back with the profits from the commercial fund before the end of the year. Richard and Susan take on a little temporary paper risk, and we all get incredibly rich. It is a win-win for everyone who actually matters. He walked toward the front door, his hand on the brass doorknob. He turned back to look at me one last time, his expression returning to that hard, bullying glare. Pay the property tax, Samuel. Liquidate your little retirement fund. Sell your pathetic car. I do not care. But you get that $2,000 to Susan by Friday, or I swear to you I will completely destroy whatever tiny, miserable reputation you have left in this city. Do we understand each other? I looked at him. I looked at this incredibly arrogant, foolish man who had just handed me the key to his absolute destruction. He thought he had trapped me. He thought he had backed me into a corner. He had no idea he had just walked willingly into his own federal execution. We understand each other perfectly, Trent, I said. My voice was no longer flat. It was sharp and cold as a razor blade. Trent smirked, believing he had won. Good boy, he said. He pushed the front door open, stepping back out into the pouring rain, and pulled his umbrella open. Have a great week, Samuel. Try not to embarrass us anymore. He walked down the concrete path and climbed into his luxury SUV. I stood in the doorway watching his taillights disappear down the wet street. The freezing clarity in my mind locked perfectly into place. Trent was committing active federal fraud. My parents were fully complicit in a massive financial lie. They were stealing $500,000 from private church investors, using my property as the bait. I closed the front door and locked the deadbolt. I did not feel fear. I did not feel intimidation. I walked straight back to my home office and picked up my phone. It was finally time to set the snare. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. But inside my duplex, the atmosphere was perfectly coldly still. I watched from the window as Trent's luxury SUV pulled away, its red taillights bleeding into the darkness. I locked the deadbolt, feeling the heavy mechanical click resonate through the quiet house. My hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing with the usual anxiety that plagued me whenever my family demanded my submission. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calm anchored my bones. Trent had marched into my living room, puffed up his chest, and tried to bully me into compliance. But in his blinding, desperate arrogance, he had made a catastrophic error. He had just confessed to a massive federal crime, handing me the exact weapon I needed to tear his plastic empire down to the studs. I walked straight to my home office. I bypassed the cheap desk chair and stood over the fireproof lockbox. For 6 grueling years, I had been the invisible foundation for a family that treated me like dirt. They thought my silence was cowardice. They thought they could secretly pledge the very house I owned to secure a $500,000 commercial bridge loan, and I would just quietly accept it. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had not used in 3 years. I did not call my mother to beg for an explanation. I did not call my sister to demand an apology. I called a man named Marcus. Marcus was my old college roommate. While I had spent my nights deep in server architecture and network manuals, he had been buried in corporate law and property litigation. Today, Marcus was a highly aggressive commercial real estate attorney at a downtown firm. He was a ruthless operator in a tailored suit, and right now, I needed a shark. The line rang twice before he picked up. Samuel. His deep voice crackled over the speaker. It has been a long time. I saw that awful video your sister posted. I was actually going to call you to see if you needed a place to crash while the digital circus cooled down. I do not need a place to crash, Marcus. I said, my voice perfectly level. I need to retain your legal services immediately. I need you to drop whatever merger you are working on today and help me draft a series of legally binding documents. I heard the sound of a heavy office door clicking shut through the phone. His casual tone instantly vanished, replaced by a sharp professional focus. "Tell me exactly what is going on." For the next 2 hours, I paced across the cheap floorboards of my office and laid out the entire devastating truth. I told Marcus everything. I told him about the $42,000 I wired to the Internal Revenue Service to save Trent from federal tax evasion charges. I told him about the $65,000 I paid to cover my parents' defaulted home equity line of credit. Then I delivered the masterpiece. I told him how I had purchased the defaulted primary mortgage note on their 4-bedroom suburban estate 3 years ago. I explained that I held the undisputed legal deed to the property and that my parents were currently living there rent-free under a quiet tenancy agreement. Finally, I dropped the hammer. I told Marcus that Trent had just stood in my living room and confessed to launching a new real estate investment fund. I explained that Trent was securing a $500,000 commercial bridge loan from a group of wealthy private church investors, and that my parents had signed a legal pledge agreement offering the estate as the primary collateral. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was tight with predatory excitement. "Samuel, you cannot legally pledge a property as collateral for a commercial loan if you do not hold the active title. If your parents signed a pledge agreement offering your house to secure a loan for Trent, they are committing active mortgage fraud. And if Trent receives those funds across state banking lines, he is committing massive federal wire fraud. This is a multi-count federal indictment waiting to happen." "I know," I replied, staring out the window. "And I am not going to warn them. I am going to let them walk right into their own execution. I need you to help me set the snare." We spent the entire afternoon drafting the paperwork. I sat at my computer typing furiously as Marcus dictated the heavy legal jargon. We started with a formal cease and desist order directed at Trent and his hollow shell company. Next, we drafted the most important document of my life. It was a formal 30-day notice of eviction directed at Richard and Susan Higgins. The grounds for eviction were a direct material breach of their quiet tenancy agreement, specifically citing their illegal attempt to pledge the property for an unauthorized commercial loan. I printed the documents, watching the black ink roll across the crisp white paper. I took the cease and desist order and the notice of eviction and placed them perfectly inside my heavy leather-bound legal folio. I then took the IRS lien documents, the wire transfer receipt for Trent's bailout, and the bank records of my parents' financial failures and slid them right behind the eviction notice. The trap was completely built. The paperwork was flawless. All I had to do was wait for the bank to process Trent's fraudulent application and trigger the alarm. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table when my cell phone vibrated. The caller identification showed an unknown local number. I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear. "Good morning," a woman said, speaking with a highly polished professional tone. "Am I speaking with Richard Higgins?" "No," I replied, keeping my breathing perfectly calm. "This is Samuel Higgins. Richard is my father. Who is calling?" "My name is Sarah, and I am calling from Oak Harbor Title and Escrow. I am processing the title clearance for a $500,000 commercial bridge loan requested by a Mr. Trent Miller. We are in the final stages of underwriting the funds for a group of private investors. We received a signed pledge agreement from Richard and Susan Higgins offering the estate at Oakwood Valley Drive as collateral." Sarah paused, and I could hear the rapid clicking of a computer mouse in the background. "We are running the final chain of title search this morning to verify the lien on the house. However, we hit an administrative flag in the county registry. The current active deed is registered under your name, Samuel Higgins. We assumed it might be a family trust discrepancy or a clerical error regarding a generational transfer. We just need to verify your position to clear the flag and release the funds to Mr. Miller." I closed my eyes. The dominoes were perfectly lined up. Trent was standing right at the edge of the cliff, entirely blind to the massive drop below him. "Sarah," I said, my voice dropping into a tone of absolute unbreakable authority. "There is no family trust. There is no clerical error. I am the sole exclusive legal owner of the property. I purchased the defaulted mortgage note 3 years ago. Richard and Susan Higgins are merely tenants." The line went completely silent. I could hear Sarah draw a sharp, frightened breath. I continued driving the final nail directly into the coffin. "I have never authorized my property to be used as collateral for any loan. If you have a document bearing the signatures of Richard and Susan Higgins attempting to secure a $500,000 bridge loan for Trent Miller, you are holding a fraudulent application. I am formally informing your title company that this transaction constitutes active mortgage fraud." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her professional composure entirely shattering. "Sir, are you absolutely certain about this?" "I am holding the original stamped county deed in my hands right now," I replied. "If your agency authorizes the release of those funds to Trent Miller, you will be facilitating a massive federal wire fraud scheme." "I have to freeze the account," Sarah stammered, her voice trembling with genuine panic. "I have to alert the senior underwriters and the compliance department right now. The investors were scheduled to wire the money tomorrow morning. We have to kill the loan completely." "Do what you have to do, Sarah," I said calmly, "but you do not need to contact Trent Miller to inform him of the cancellation." Sarah sounded bewildered. "We have to send a formal notice of denial, sir. It is banking protocol." "I know," I replied, "but standard banking protocol dictates that a formal notice of denial takes at least 48 hours to process through the compliance department. Is that correct?" "Yes," Sarah answered hesitantly. "The official rejection letter will not be generated and sent to his broker until Monday, but he is expecting the money to clear tomorrow." "Let him wait for the official letter," I said. "Thank you for your diligence, Sarah." I hung up the phone and set it down on the counter. A cold, triumphant smile touched the corners of my mouth. The legal trap had snapped entirely shut. The escrow agency had frozen the transaction. The $500,000 would never leave the investors' bank accounts. Trent's massive real estate fund was officially dead before it even began, but Trent did not know that yet. Trent was completely oblivious. He was currently preparing to host a lavish, extravagant investment launch dinner at the Oakwood Valley Country Club tonight. He had invited the wealthiest members of the community and the exact church investors he was trying to defraud. He was going to stand on a stage, drink expensive champagne, and celebrate his massive financial victory. He thought he was untouchable. I walked back into my home office and picked up the thick leather-bound legal folio from my desk. The weight of the eviction notice, the cease and desist order, and the undeniable financial receipts felt incredibly satisfying in my hands. The dominoes were perfectly lined up. All I had to do now was walk through those heavy mahogany country club doors and push them over in front of everyone. The Oakwood Valley Country Club was glowing like a beacon of absolute wealth and unearned privilege against the dark Friday night sky. From my vantage point in the parking lot sitting inside my cold car, I could see the grand ballroom through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The crystal chandeliers were turned up to their maximum brilliance, casting a warm golden light over the 200 guests gathered inside. It was the exact same room where my life had been publicly dismantled exactly 2.5 weeks ago. But tonight was not an anniversary party. Tonight was the grand premiere of Trent Miller's fraudulent empire. It was the official investment launch dinner for Trent's hollow commercial real estate fund. The scale of the event was absolutely staggering, designed specifically to overwhelm the senses and project an illusion of infinite financial stability. There were towering ice sculptures carved into the shapes of city skylines resting on the buffet tables. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and imported champagne. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume roasted meats and the intoxicating scent of high society arrogance. Trent and Chloe had spared absolutely no expense, which was incredibly ironic, considering they were paying for this lavish spectacle with money they did not actually have. I watched through the glass as Trent held court in the center of the room. He was wearing a brand new, custom-tailored velvet dinner jacket. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand, and was gesturing wildly with the other, playing the role of the visionary financial genius to absolute perfection. He was completely surrounded by the wealthiest members of our community. I recognized the mayor. I recognized several local judges. But more importantly, I recognized the private church investors. They were older couples, mostly in their 60s and 70s, who had built quiet, conservative wealth over decades of hard work. They were decent, trusting people who attended my parents' church. Trent was smiling at them, shaking their hands, clapping them on the shoulder. He was selling them a vision of guaranteed returns and community development. Those elderly investors were the exact people Trent was relying on to wire $500,000 into his bank account. They truly believed they were funding a legitimate downtown commercial acquisition. They had no idea they were throwing their life savings into a black hole of federal wire fraud secured by a residential property deed that did not even belong to the people who pledged it, and seated right at the front table, basking in the reflected glory of their golden son-in-law, were my parents. Richard and Susan Higgins looked like royalty. My mother was wearing a new designer gown. My father was smoking an expensive cigar, nodding along to whatever lies Trent was spinning to the crowd. They looked so incredibly proud. They had willingly signed a legal document offering the roof over their heads as collateral for Trent's bridge loan. They had lied to the bank, they had lied to the investors, and they had lied to themselves. They actually believed that their financial nightmares were finally over. The tragic comedy of the entire situation was almost beautiful. The entire room was celebrating a $500,000 transaction that was already completely dead. They were cheering for a bridge loan that had been secretly frozen by a panicked title agency 36 hours ago because of my phone call. But Trent did not know that yet. Trent thought the bank was just processing the final paperwork. He thought the money was going to hit his account at midnight. He thought he had won the ultimate victory. I turned off the engine of my car. For 6 years, I had sat in the background and watched these people construct a towering monument of lies. I had let them use my blood, my sweat, and my absolute financial ruin as the mortar to hold their bricks together. I had let them look down on me, mock me, and broadcast my humiliation to millions of strangers on the internet. But the era of the pathetic invisible brother was officially over. I stepped out of the car. I was not wearing the frayed 5-year-old off-the-rack suit that had made me the laughingstock of the internet. I was wearing a perfectly tailored dark charcoal suit that I had purchased earlier that afternoon with the last remaining funds in my checking account. My shoes were polished. My posture was completely straight. I did not look like a cautionary tale. I looked like a man who owned the building. In my right hand, I carried the thick, heavy leather-bound legal folio. It contained the formal cease and desist orders, the documented Internal Revenue Service tax, liens the bank records of my parents' defaulted loans, and the official 30-day notice of eviction. But most importantly, it contained the undisputed certified county deed to the Higgins family estate. It was not just a folder of paper. It was a loaded weapon. I walked across the gravel parking lot, my footsteps steady and deliberate. I approached the grand entrance of the country club. The 2 valets standing by the door immediately straightened up, moving to open the heavy mahogany double doors for me. They did not look at me with pity. They did not recognize me as the viral joke from 2 weeks ago. My physical transformation and the cold, terrifying authority radiating from my face made them step aside without a single word. I walked into the grand foyer. The sound of a live string quartet drifted out from the main ballroom, accompanied by the loud, booming laughter of 200 wealthy elites. I walked directly toward the closed service doors at the back of the room, the exact same doors I had fled through in absolute tears during the anniversary party. I placed my hand on the brass handles. I did not hesitate. I pushed the heavy doors wide open. The doors hit the interior walls with a loud, echoing crack that cut sharply through the music. I stepped into the ballroom. For a few seconds, nobody noticed me. The string quartet continued to play. The guests continued to drink and laugh. But then a waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening. A woman near the back table turned her head at the sound of the doors, and her jaw dropped. The silence began at the back of the room and spread forward like a fast-moving shadow. The string quartet faltered. The cellist missed a note, looked up, and slowly stopped playing. Within 10 seconds, the entire ballroom went completely, incredibly dead silent. 200 heads turned to face the back of the room. It was the exact same audience that had laughed at me. I saw the mayor. I saw the country club president. I saw my former fiancée, Claire, standing near the bar with a glass of wine halfway to her lips, her face turning chalk white as she stared at the man she had just abandoned. I did not look at the floor. I did not shrink away from their stares. I kept my head high, my grip tight on the leather folio, and I looked directly at the main stage. Chloe was standing near the microphone stand. When she saw me, her initial expression of shock quickly mutated into a vicious, familiar smirk. She thought this was a repeat of the anniversary gala. She thought I was crawling back to beg for forgiveness, or worse, to make a scene that she could record for another 1,000,000 views. She grabbed the microphone from the stand, her eyes lighting up with the thrill of a fresh kill. "Well, well, well," Chloe's voice boomed through the massive speakers, dripping with theatrical condescension. "Look who decided to crash the party. Ladies and gentlemen, please hold your applause. It seems my disgruntled, unemployed older brother just could not bear to miss out on watching real success happen." A few people in the crowd chuckled, a nervous, conditioned response to Chloe's bullying. But the laughter was thin. There was something in my posture, something in the cold, dead way I was looking at them that made the room deeply uncomfortable. My parents turned around in their chairs at the head table. My mother's face flushed with immediate rage. She half stood, waving her hand frantically toward the back of the room. My father slammed his fist on the table, his face twisting into a furious scowl. "Samuel!" my father shouted over the crowd, not needing a microphone. "What on earth are you doing here? You are not on the guest list. You have caused enough embarrassment for this family. Get out immediately." I did not answer him. I took my first step forward. My polished shoes clicked loudly against the hardwood floor. I began to walk directly down the center aisle of the ballroom, cutting straight through the sea of incredibly wealthy, powerful people. As I moved, the crowd physically parted for me. People stepped back, pulling their chairs in their eyes, darting from my sharp suit to the heavy leather folio in my hand. The nervous chuckles completely died away. The atmosphere in the room shifted from arrogant amusement to genuine, creeping dread. Chloe gripped the microphone tighter, her knuckles turning white. Her smirk began to falter as I continued my slow, methodical march toward the stage. "Security," Chloe commanded into the microphone, her voice suddenly shrill and panicked. "Security, we have an uninvited guest. Please remove my brother from the premises immediately. He is trespassing." 2 large security guards in dark suits stepped out from the shadows near the stage. They moved to intercept me, stepping directly into the center aisle to block my path. They crossed their arms, their expressions stern and uncompromising. I did not stop walking. I did not slow down. I walked right up to the first security guard, stopping mere inches from his chest. He reached out to grab my shoulder. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a cold, absolute venom that made the guard freeze. "I am a legally vested party in the financial transaction being celebrated in this room tonight. I am carrying certified federal and county documents pertaining directly to the host of this event. If you put your hands on me, I will have your security license revoked and this country club sued for physical assault before midnight." I held up the thick leather folio, the gold-embossed county seal catching the light of the chandeliers. The security guard looked at the folio. He looked at my unblinking, terrifyingly calm eyes. He was paid $20 an hour to escort drunk members to their cars, not to engage in high-level corporate legal disputes. He swallowed hard, lowered his hands, and took a slow step backward, clearing the path. His partner immediately followed suit, stepping aside to let me pass. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Claire dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the floor, the sound ringing out like a gunshot, but absolutely nobody looked at her. Every single eye in the room was locked exclusively on me. I reached the edge of the stage. Trent was standing a few feet behind Chloe. His custom velvet jacket suddenly looked ridiculous. His tanned face had lost all its color, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He was staring at the leather folio in my hand, his mind desperately trying to calculate what was happening. He had threatened me just 2 days ago. He had ordered me to liquidate my savings and pay a $2,000 property tax bill. He had expected me to cower in my duplex and obey his commands. He never expected the invisible workhorse to walk into his fortress. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the main stage. My movements were slow, deliberate, and surgical. I walked directly up to Chloe. She was trembling slightly, holding the microphone like a shield. She looked into my eyes, searching for the broken, humiliated brother she had mathematically destroyed on the internet. She did not find him. She found an auditor completely empty of mercy. I reached out and took the microphone from her shaking hand. She did not try to stop me. She practically surrendered it, taking a terrified step backward until her back hit Trent's chest. I turned to face the crowd of 200 people. The silence was so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents in the ceiling. The private church investors in the front row were leaning forward, their faces etched with deep confusion and concern. The mayor was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. My parents were frozen in their chairs, their faces drained of all their previous arrogance. I stood in the exact center of the stage. I was standing in the exact same spot where my sister had ruined my life. But the spotlight did not burn me this time. The spotlight belonged to me. I brought the microphone to my mouth. I placed the thick leather-bound folio onto the wooden podium in front of me. I unhooked the brass latch and flipped the heavy cover open. The crisp, white legal document stared back at me, ready to be unleashed. I looked directly at Trent, then at my parents, and finally at the sea of wealthy investors waiting for me to speak. It was time to pull the trigger. The blinding white spotlight from the ceiling hit my face, but this time it did not burn me. 2.5 weeks ago, I stood in this exact same ballroom and let the heat of that light melt away my dignity. I let 200 of the wealthiest people in the city laugh at my cheap suit and my modest job. But tonight, I was not a victim caught in a trap. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. I stood at the wooden podium on the main stage and looked out over the sea of expensive custom tuxedos and designer silk gowns. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. The waiters had frozen in place, holding their silver trays of imported champagne. The silence in the massive room was heavy, suffocating, and thick with sudden creeping dread. I did not need to shout. When you hold the absolute undisputed truth in your hands, you do not need to raise your voice. I reached out and adjusted the microphone. I looked directly at the private church investors sitting in the front row. They were older, conservative couples who had spent decades building their quiet wealth. They were staring at me with deep confusion and concern. "Good evening," I said softly. My voice echoed across the massive ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers with surgical precision. 2 weeks ago, my sister Chloe stood on this very stage and called me a cautionary tale. She told all of you that I was a pathetic failure who settled for mediocrity while she and her husband built an elite empire. I stayed silent that night. I let you all laugh at my expense. But tonight is a celebration of investments. And as any intelligent investor knows, you must always verify the hard assets before you write the massive check. I looked down at the thick, leather-bound folio resting on the podium. I unhooked the brass latch and slowly flipped the heavy cover open. The crisp, white legal document stared back at me, perfectly organized and ready to be unleashed. Many of you sitting in the front row are preparing to wire $500,000 to Trent Miller tomorrow morning. I continued, keeping my tone completely analytical and flat. You are providing a massive commercial bridge loan for his new downtown real estate fund. You believe he is a financial genius. You believe he is a winner. I am here to share his actual financial portfolio with you. I reached into the folio and pulled out the first thick document. I held it high in the air so the bright lights caught the official government seal. 3 years ago, Trent Miller showed up at my cheap rented duplex in the middle of the pouring rain. I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent, terrified room. He was crying uncontrollably on my living room floor. His visionary real estate firm was completely bankrupt. It was nothing but a fragile shell company propped up by high-interest loans. He had committed severe tax evasion and was facing immediate federal prison time. The government was threatening to seize every single asset he owned and publicly destroy his perfect life. I paused, letting the heavy words sink into the quiet room. I looked over at Trent. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. His custom velvet dinner jacket hung loosely on his suddenly rigid frame. The arrogant smile had been completely wiped from his face, leaving behind a pale, sweating mask of pure terror. Chloe was staring at him, her mouth slightly open, completely oblivious to the truth of her own fake life. I hold in my hand the official Internal Revenue Service notice of federal tax lien. I read directly from the paper, looking back at the crowd. It details a $42,000 tax penalty for a hollow business that generated zero actual revenue. Trent did not pay this penalty. He did not have a single liquid dollar to his name. I paid it. I emptied my entire life savings and wired $42,000 directly to the United States Treasury just to keep my brilliant brother-in-law out of a concrete federal penitentiary. A loud, sharp gasp erupted from a woman in the second row. The private investors in the front row completely froze. The lead investor, an older gentleman wearing a dark gray suit, narrowed his eyes and leaned forward, gripping the edge of his linen-covered table. His business is an absolute, undeniable fraud, I stated firmly, looking directly into the eyes of the lead investor. Trent Miller is not a commercial real estate mogul. He is a financial parasite who uses my bank account to fund his custom Italian suits and his vintage watches. If you wire him $500,000 tomorrow, you are throwing your life savings into a black hole of debt that he can never possibly repay. The ballroom erupted into panicked, urgent whispers. The illusion was violently cracking. The elite members of the country club were turning their heads, looking at Trent with sudden, profound suspicion. Trent opened his mouth to defend himself, but absolutely nothing came out. He raised his hands, trying to motion to the crowd, but his hands were shaking so violently he had to drop them back to his sides in defeat. "But Trent is not the only one in this room living a massive financial lie," I said, raising my voice slightly to cut through the rising panic. I turned my attention to the head table. My parents, Richard and Susan Higgins, looked absolutely petrified. My father was gripping the edges of the table so hard his knuckles were bone white. My mother was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. They finally realized what was sitting inside my leather folio. They finally understood that the quiet workhorse had kept all the receipts. "My parents are highly respected members of this elite community," I told the crowd, my voice dropping back into a cold, steady rhythm. "They host extravagant parties. They donate to local political campaigns. They look down their noses at anyone who does not meet their wealthy social standards. But their entire existence is a tragic financial illusion built on my breaking back." I reached into the folio and pulled the next stack of papers from the pile. When my father bankrupted his private investments and defaulted on a $65,000 home equity line of credit, the bank threatened aggressive public collections, I explained. I was the one who marched into the local bank branch and handed the teller a certified cashier's check to save their precious reputation. I bled myself entirely dry so they could continue pretending to be local aristocrats. I dropped those bank records onto the podium and reached for the final document, the absolute masterpiece of my collection. The room was so incredibly quiet I could clearly hear the thick legal paper sliding against the smooth leather of the folio. "Trent told all of you that his $500,000 commercial loan was completely secure," I said, looking back at the church investors. "He told you that Richard and Susan Higgins officially pledged the deed to their massive 4-bedroom suburban estate as the primary collateral for your money. He told you the house was completely paid off and free of any financial burdens." I looked directly at the lead investor and delivered the fatal blow. "That pledge agreement is completely and legally fraudulent." I held up the official assignment of mortgage and deed of trust. I held it high above my head, turning it slowly so everyone in the room could see the Gold County Clerk seal stamped on the bottom corner. 3 years ago, my parents secretly stopped paying their primary mortgage. I announced, my voice ringing with total, absolute authority. They were exactly 24 hours away from total foreclosure. The bank was going to seize the property and auction it off on the courthouse steps, but they did not tell Trent. They did not tell Chloe. They told me to fix it, and I did exactly what they asked. I turned my head and looked directly into my father's panicked, completely defeated eyes. "I did not just pay the bank to cover your tracks," I said, addressing my father directly in front of the entire town. "I hired an aggressive commercial real estate attorney. I bought your defaulted note directly from the bank. I am the sole exclusive legal owner of the Oakwood Valley Drive estate. You do not own the roof over your head. I own it. You have been living in my house completely rent-free for 3 years while you treated me like an absolute failure." The collective shock in the room hit like a physical shockwave. People physically recoiled in their seats. They were staring at my parents with pure, undisguised disgust. The facade of the great Higgins family was completely demolished, leaving nothing but a pile of pathetic, fraudulent garbage. "Trent," I said, turning back to my trembling brother-in-law, "you cannot use a residential house as collateral for a commercial loan when you do not legally own the deed. When you submitted that pledge agreement to the title agency, you committed active federal mortgage fraud. And because I personally called the title agency yesterday morning, your $500,000 transaction has been permanently frozen and reported directly to their compliance department." Trent actually stumbled backward. He bumped heavily into the metal microphone stand, knocking it askew. His perfect, arrogant facade shattered completely. He looked exactly like the terrified, broke fraud who had cried on my floor 3 years ago. $42,000 to the Internal Revenue Service to keep Trent out of federal prison. I calculated aloud, my voice echoing perfectly through the speakers. $65,000 to cover my parents' defaulted equity line of credit. $80,000 in pure liquid cash to purchase the defaulted primary mortgage note. That is a grand total of $187,000. I picked up the thick stack of formal legal notices from the podium. I walked down the 3 wooden steps of the stage and approached Trent. I shoved the heavy papers directly into his shaking chest, forcing him to wrap his arms around them to keep them from hitting the floor. "Those are the formal, legally binding cease and desist orders," I told him. "And right behind them is an immediate 30-day notice of eviction for Richard and Susan Higgins. You are all in material breach of your quiet tenancy agreement for attempting to illegally pledge my private property. You have exactly 1 month to pack your imported clothes and get out of my house." Absolute panic instantly broke out across the ballroom. The illusion shattered completely in real time. The lead investor in the front row stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. His face was purple with absolute fury. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and began shouting at Trent, calling him a pathetic criminal who tried to steal their retirement funds. Another investor was loudly demanding that someone lock the country club doors and call the local authorities immediately regarding the fraudulent loan collateral. Chloe collapsed into a chair, sobbing hysterically as she finally realized her entire millionaire lifestyle was a complete fake. My parents sat completely paralyzed at the head table, staring blankly at the wall as their elite social standing evaporated into thin air. I stood in the middle of the chaos, completely calm, perfectly untouched by the fire I had just started. 3 months have passed since the night I stood on that stage and dropped the heavy legal folio that completely shattered my family. Reality is an incredibly harsh and unforgiving teacher when you have spent your entire life living an absolute illusion. Trent Miller is currently sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting his criminal trial. The morning after the country club confrontation, federal agents raided his leased downtown office because he had actively attempted to secure a $500,000 commercial bridge loan using a fraudulent residential deed. The federal prosecutors threw the absolute book at him. He was formally charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and tax evasion. Every single one of his bank accounts was immediately frozen by the government. His custom Italian suits and his vintage luxury watches were seized as criminal evidence. Chloe, my beautiful, arrogant sister who stood in a blinding spotlight and called me a pathetic failure, is now working a minimum wage retail job at a local strip mall. She spends 8 hours a day standing on her feet scanning barcodes and folding clearance sweaters just to afford the monthly retainer for Trent's criminal defense attorneys. She does not post on social media anymore. The millionaire sister who bragged about carrying her broke brother is now learning exactly how heavy the real world actually is when you have to carry your own weight. And my parents, Richard and Susan Higgins, the grand pillars of the local community, are no longer hosting extravagant charity galas. I legally enforced the 30-day notice of eviction. I gave them exactly 1 month to pack their imported clothes and vacate my property. They now live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment right next to a busy, noisy highway 10 miles outside of town. They do not go to the country club anymore because their membership was revoked the second the fraud scandal hit the local papers. I did not keep their house. I put the massive 4-bedroom suburban estate on the open market and it sold in less than a week. I completely recouped my original $187,000 investment, and because the property values in that elite neighborhood had skyrocketed over the past 3 years, I walked away with a massive $600,000 profit in pure liquid cash. When the wire transfer hit my checking account, I just sat at my computer and stared at the numbers. It was the exact opposite of the panic I used to feel when my family demanded my savings. I paid off my own small debts. I bought my duplex outright, and I finally replaced my rattling old Honda Civic with a reliable brand new truck. I secured my future by tearing down their fake past. Success has a very strange way of bringing the dead back to life. 2 weeks after the country club disaster, when the local news stations began running sensational stories about the massive fraud ring orchestrated by a prominent real estate broker, the narrative completely flipped. The viral video that Chloe had weaponized against me suddenly became the ultimate piece of poetic justice. Millions of people who had watched me being publicly humiliated were now watching the follow-up videos explaining how the quiet IT guy actually owned the house his abusers lived in. The entire internet turned on my sister and my brother-in-law. And right on cue, my phone started ringing again. It was Claire. My former fiancée, who had packed her bags and abandoned me the exact second my life got difficult, suddenly wanted to talk. She started leaving me long, tearful voicemails. She would cry into the phone, telling me she had made a massive mistake. She claimed she was just overwhelmed by the public pressure that night, but deep down, she always knew I was incredibly special. She said she missed my stability and wanted to try to rebuild our relationship now that the toxic family drama was finally over. I would sit on my new couch listening to her voice tremble through the phone speaker, and I would feel absolutely nothing. She did not want me when I was a sinking ship. She only wanted me now that she realized I was the captain of the rescue boat. I did not call her back. I did not text her an angry paragraph. I simply pressed delete and blocked her number permanently. She wanted a man who commanded respect, and I finally respected myself enough to completely cut her out of my life. That same week, I received a very different phone call. It was Mr. Harrison, the school district superintendent. He did not sound cold or dismissive this time. He sounded incredibly nervous and deeply apologetic. The school board had seen the local news reports. They realized they had aggressively suspended the victim of a massive financial crime. The public relations distraction they were so terrified of had turned into a massive wave of public support for me. Parents in the community were actively demanding my reinstatement. Mr. Harrison formally apologized for rushing to judgment and begged me to return to my position. He even offered me a substantial raise and a promotion to Director of Information Technology for the entire district. I walked back into that brick administration building not as a defeated outcast, but as a man who had completely weathered the storm. My coworkers did not whisper behind my back anymore. They looked at me with genuine, quiet respect. I spend a lot of time now sitting quietly on my porch, drinking my morning coffee and reflecting on everything that happened. Society has a very dangerous habit of assigning massive value to the loudest, flashiest people in the room. We live in a culture that worships the illusion of success. We applaud the people taking selfies on rented yachts. We admire the people wearing custom-tailored suits and driving imported sports cars. We are conditioned to believe that if someone looks wealthy and speaks with arrogant authority, they must inherently possess some kind of superior value. But we completely ignore the quiet people standing in the background. We look down on the people wearing cheap clothes and driving old cars. We forget about the people working the long, invisible hours, fixing the servers, maintaining the infrastructure, paying the taxes, and holding the actual foundation of the world together. For 6 years, I let my family convince me that I was less than human because I did not care about designer labels or country club memberships. I let them call me a pathetic failure because I chose to live a modest, quiet life. But what I finally realized is that being called a failure by people who are living a massive, fraudulent lie is actually the greatest compliment you can possibly receive. Their definition of success was entirely built on debt deception and the exploitation of my loyalty. They were terrified of the truth because the truth meant they had to look in the mirror and see the empty, hollow shells they truly were. I look back at the man I was the night of that anniversary party. I was standing in the shadows, gripping a plastic cup of water, feeling so incredibly small and insignificant. I thought my worth was determined by the way my parents looked at me. I thought my value was dictated by my sister's mocking laughter. It took hitting absolute rock bottom. It took losing my job and my fiancé in the exact same day for me to finally open my eyes. I had to realize that I was the one holding the power all along. The people who scream the loudest about their success are almost always overcompensating for a massive, terrifying failure hidden just behind closed doors. Trent had to act like an alpha male because he knew he was a terrified criminal. Chloe had to humiliate me publicly because she secretly knew her entire lifestyle was funded by my sweat. My parents had to look down on me because acknowledging my massive financial contributions would destroy their fragile aristocratic egos. They needed me to be a loser so they could pretend to be winners. But the truth does not care about your ego. The truth is a relentless force of nature, and when it finally arrives, it washes away everything that is fake. True wealth is not a platinum credit card or a fancy address in a gated community. True wealth is laying your head on your pillow at night with a completely clean conscience. It is living a debt-free life where nobody can call you and demand your submission. It is looking at the people around you and knowing they love you for who you are, not for the financial bailout you can provide them. Most importantly, true wealth is having the absolute strength to walk away from a toxic bloodline. We are taught that family is everything. We are told that we must forgive our parents and support our siblings no matter how terribly they treat us. But loyalty without mutual respect is just sophisticated abuse. I had to stop breaking my own back to carry people who only knew how to point fingers and demand more. I had to let their fake glittering empire crash to the ground so I could finally build a real life of my own. I am no longer the cautionary tale of the Higgins family. I am the man who survived them. I am the man who exposed the rot inside the foundation and walked away completely untouched by the collapse. I am 36 years old, and for the first time in my entire life, I am completely, entirely free. I do not flinch when my phone rings anymore. I do not spend my nights worrying about other people's unpaid bills or fraudulent loans. I go to work, I do my job, and I come home to a peaceful, quiet house that belongs entirely to me. If you are listening to this right now, and you have ever been the one carrying the heavy weight for people who only know how to point fingers, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Stop breaking your back for them. Stop emptying your own savings accounts and sacrificing your own mental health to maintain their perfect illusions. Let them carry their own reality. Let them face the actual consequences of their own actions. You do not owe your life to people who use your loyalty as a weapon against you. Do not let their noise drown out your truth. Stand your ground, protect your peace, and never be afraid to let the fake empires fall. Your real life is waiting for you on the other side of their collapse. If this story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might need a serious reminder of their own worth. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts. Have you ever had to cut off a highly toxic family member to save yourself? How did you find the strength to finally walk away? Subscribe to the channel for more stories about uncovering the truth and reclaiming your life. And always remember, the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the absolutely most to hide.